Drop it.
The Nanchang Q-5 and its variant, known to NATO as the Fantan, are a family of second-generation Chinese ground attack aircraft. Both in real life and in War Thunder, these aircraft are certainly unique and offer a fascinating insight into the early history of Chinese aviation. Join me in this video as we take a dive into these planes, going over their history and how to play them. The People's Liberation Army Air Force was one of the main users of the Soviet-designed MiG-19, which was produced locally in China from 1958 as the J-6. That same year, the PLAAF requested a jet attack aircraft to fill the CAS gap in their air fleet, and Nanchang Aircraft Manufacturing Corporation was put on the task. Their work took 2 years, and they decided to modify the J-6 to fill this role. The wings were made larger and with a reduced sweep angle, which cost some high-altitude speed, but maintained the same at low altitude. The same WP6 engines, being copies of the RD-9, were kept and, most notably, the air intakes were moved from the nose to the side of the plane to make space for a planned radar that was never actually fitted. The 30mm were replaced by two Type 23-1 23mm cannons in the wing roots, which were copies of the Soviet NR-23 found on earlier aircraft such as the MiG-19. The Q-5 was given 6 external pylons as well as a bomb bay, although this rarely saw intended use, and usually was used for carrying additional fuel. Initially, the political climate in China resulted in the project being cancelled in 1961, although a small team managed to keep it alive until work restarted, and the first flight took place in 1965. The PLAAF were very happy with their new aircraft, and production started in 1969. Over the next 40-odd years, roughly 1,300 of these would be built across several different variants and for multiple export partners. NATO gave it the reporting name Fantan. A few early variants that we don't yet have in-game include the Q-5 Jia, which was modified to carry Kwangbiao-1 tactical nuclear bombs in the bomb bay, and the Q-5 Yi, which mounted torpedoes for the Navy. The first Q-5 represented in War Thunder is the Q-5 Early. Sitting at rank 6, it's positioned after the F-84G in the strike aircraft line. Since it is a strike aircraft, we'll go over its performance in both air RB and ground RB. In air battles, it sits at 9.3 and essentially plays like a slightly downgraded MiG-19, being at the same BR. When compared to the J-6A and MiG-19 PT by extension, there are a number of notable differences. First of all, you don't have the PL2 or R3S that they carry. This isn't the end of the world, as you are fairly fast, but you'll still miss it, as having that extra reach really helps. Next, your cannons, being rather low velocity 23mm, aren't the best for your airframe. They lack the velocity to make longer distance shots, and you don't have very much ammo. They are also hit machines, often being incapable of doing anything other than lightly tickling your foes. This combines together to make it more difficult to hit the same sort of shots, and can cost you. Your airframe is slightly downgraded, although not by much, to the point where you'll only really notice it against MiG-19s. You're slightly slower and turn more or less the same. In playing the Q-5 early, you're going to want to play it pretty much identically to the MiG-19, as an energy fighter. The MiG-19 is one of the best energy fighters in the game, giving you really good retention, allowing you to win most one-on-one dogfights in the right circumstances. In short, you must master the vertical loop. Learn it, love it, it will be your salvation. You don't have flares, but that shouldn't matter too much, as you're able to kinematically dodge most missiles of this BR, although be careful around A-10s and Su-25s in full up tiers. If you do want to squeeze a little more survivability out, you can bring your rocket pods, which you can use as improvised flares. Just bear in mind that these won't be effective as actual flares, especially against AIM-9Ls, and you don't get very many, and they do hinder your flight performance. If bombing bases is your thing, the Q-5 can only destroy one base, which will require 3 of your 4 incendiary bombs. I wouldn't recommend this, however, as most other planes used to bomb bases will beat you there. Overall, the Q-5 Early is usable in air battles, but isn't particularly good. There's no reason to be playing this over the J6A, which is a direct upgrade at the same BR. The Q5 early used to be 9.0, and if it ever returned there, it would be significantly nicer to fly, as it used to be. In ground battles, the Q5 early sits at 9.0 and fits nicely into China's rather large 9.0 lineup. There isn't much competition for its role as a CAS plane, as your only other 9.0 plane is an F-86 Sabre. For CAS, it can carry 4 250 kilo bombs as well as 2 small rocket pods. Save the rockets for very light vehicles such as SPAA, as they're not great. You, unfortunately, lack any form of CCIP or CCRP, and so have to make your bombing runs completely off your own aiming skills. I'd recommend staying fairly fast, although below marks so you can drop your bombs, and low. You do also lack flares, unless using the rocket pods mentioned earlier, but even those won't save you against any stingers or iglas launched at you. In short, while you probably are the best CAS jet at 9.0 for China, you still aren't very strong.
Gleichzeitig in Berlin.
Radiofunker, wir müssen deinem SOS antworten. Hey, Radiofunker, senden aus Berlin an allen Orten. Antworten. Hey, Radiofunker, wir müssen deinem SOS antworten. Antworten. Hey, hey, antworten.
In the coming years, the Q5 saw a number of upgrades. The first of these entered service in 1981 as the Q51, also called the Q5A, which replaced the bomb bay with an internal fuel tank and featured additional pylons to increase the payload capacity. This was followed by the Q51A, also called the Q5B, which featured an early RWR, new armaments, and an improved gun and bomb sight, as well as flare dispensers. An extra outer pylon was also added under each wing, which could mount bombs, rocket pods, or air-to-air missiles, namely PL-2 or PL-5 infrared homing ones. In War Thunder, the Q5A is more representative of the Q5B and sits just below the Q5 early at rank 6. Compared to the Q5 early, it has a nice list of improvements. First, I'll talk about the ones relative to Air RB, before moving on to Ground RB later. For starters, it features 18 large caliber countermeasures. This isn't many, but just by virtue of having some, you're significantly more capable and can take some fights that you'd previously have to avoid, especially against all-aspect slingers. These being large caliber also helps, as they're able to defeat most missiles with a single flare. Next, you'd been fitted with new engines, WP6A3s. These offer you an increase in thrust and offset your increased weight, offering you a better thrust-to-weight ratio than the Q5 early. Moving on, you now have the Type 930 RWR. This doesn't hurt, but it's not terribly useful either. It only covers the rear and only I-band radars, meaning you won't get much mileage out of it. Unfortunately, these improvements come at a bit of a dire cost in Air RB. Your BR has been pushed up to 10.0. This really does put a significant strain on the aircraft, especially as, unlike in reality, you're not able to mount any missiles. Essentially, you're a Q5 early with flares and marginally better flight performance. All of your killing still has to be done with those rather disappointing cannons, which you'll find harder to do against the increasingly capable planes that you'll be fighting. Your playstyle remains much as the previous Q5 early. You're still going to have to dogfight to get all of your kills, and the prospect of base bombing gets even harder as your fellow jets will still usually beat you to any bases. The Q5A used to be rather quite enjoyable as a side grade to the J6A, being the same BR as it and trading missiles and good cannons for flares. But unfortunately, that's no longer the case. I'd really not recommend trying to spade this in Air RB. In Ground RB, the upgrades in the Q5A become more noticeable. At only 9.3, it slots in nicely to China's 9.3 lineup, and is arguably the best CAS you have available for that BR. In addition to the changes mentioned above, it gets CCIP, parachute bombs, and some nice rocket pods. These rocket pods are the Type 130-2s, and while you only get 8, they are very nice when paired with the CCIP. Being large HE rockets, they're able to overpressure most tanks on a roof hit, and can obliterate light vehicles and, most notably, SPAA. Your parachute bombs also pair really well with your CCIP, allowing you to fly very low and fast over the battlefield, dropping bombs with a very small window for you to be shot at by SPAA. As such, I usually recommend this as the loadout to take for CAS. In my experience, I find the Q-5A much more enjoyable to play in ground RB as opposed to air RB, and once you get your bombs researched, I'd recommend switching over to using it in this role. After the Q-5-1A, the next upgrade to reach the Q-5 came in the form of the Q-5-2, or the Q-5C. This fitted the Q-5 with an omnidirectional radar warning receiver, which was a well-appreciated improvement. Two international projects were worked on at this time, the Q-5M and the Q-5K. The Q-5M was a joint Chinese-Italian project which aimed to upgrade the Q-5C with the avionics from Italy's AMX attacker. This was to include a radar, HUD, RWR, and various other computers, and was set to be completed in 1989. In 1992, work was also done on an improved sight, navigation system, and HUD. Due to political concerns, the project was paused in 1989, and while it was approved to resume in 1992, the time lost meant it failed to enter production. The other project was the Q-5K. This was a joint Chinese-French one, which aimed to provide much of the same upgrades as the Q-5M. This too was paused in 1989 due to those same political concerns, but was never resumed and instead got axed in 1993. In 1996, during the Taiwan Strait crisis, the Q-5D was introduced. This featured a new HUD, sight, laser rangefinder, and navigation radar. Around a decade later, the Q-5E was put into service, with a new pylon able to mount laser-guided bombs, finally bringing the Q-5 into the modern era. Due to weight issues, it wasn't able to mount its own laser pod, and instead had to fly with the Q-5F, which was a specialized laser-designated carrier developed in tandem with the Q-5E. The next notable version of the Q-5 was the Q-5L. This was an upgraded version that featured many modern capabilities and was the final version of the Q-5. This featured compatibility with a new targeting pod, with infrared capability which allowed the Q-5L to work day and night. Alongside other avionics improvements, it featured a modern RWR. This version was the last operational with a PLAAF and served until 2017 when it was fully replaced by other strike aircraft, such as the JH-7A. In War Thunder, the Q-5L sits at rank 7 after the Q-5A and represents a significant leap in CAS capabilities. First, we'll talk about air battles. The Q-5L sits at the same BR as the Q-5A and is just a very minor upgrade over it. It features a new, highly capable digital RWR that has full coverage and target ID, allowing you much greater situational awareness. This comes at the cost of a very small increase in weight, which isn't noticeable. The only other change you'll notice in Air RB is your ability to carry 6 incendiary bombs, which will allow you to destroy 2 bases, although you won't reach the bases any quicker, so I still won't recommend it. With that all said, your playstyle is identical to that of the Q-5A, so I'd still do this one in ground battles. In ground RB, the Q-5L is a significant step up from the Q-5A, and this is shown in its BR increase, up to 10.3. Luckily, it still has a nice line up there, and pairs really well with the J7E. The Q-5L's main strength is its access to guided bombs on a supersonic platform. When you're not being up-tiered, you're able to drop your laser-guided bombs from out of range of most SPAA, whilst having the energy to dodge more or less anything that can reach you. Your targeting pod, the KPZS-01, is quite nice. It doesn't have the highest resolution thermals, but it still has them, allowing you to find targets rather quickly. It also features target tracking. As for your weapons, you have 2 notable new ones, the GB250 and the GB500, and you can take a total of 2. While the GB500 is significantly larger, I'd actually recommend bringing the GB250. This is because, unlike the GB500, the GB250 actually features dual-mode laser and GPS guidance, as opposed to the GB500 which lacks any sort of inertial guidance. These bombs are also very nice in general, as they start tracking the laser from much further away than their counterparts in other nations, meaning they're much more likely to hit moving targets. As you can only bring 2 guided bombs, I'd recommend prioritizing your targets carefully, focusing on SPAA and people that are the biggest threats to your team. If there are no SPAA, your Type 130 rockets are quite nice and you can use some dumb bombs, but usually I'd recommend erring on the side of caution and going back for more guided ones once you've dropped them. Do be mindful of other aircraft. Your RWR should help you see them coming, but you're going to struggle against most of them. While we've covered the notable domestic variants of the Q-5, it wasn't just used by China. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and North Korea all used it, whilst Myanmar and Sudan continue to do so. The first of these export variants was the A5, which was an early variant, likely either the early Q5 or the Q5A, which was exported to North Korea in the 70s. The next version was the A52A, which was a Q5C for Sudan. This was followed by the A53, also known as the A5C, which was specifically developed for export and was essentially a Q5C with an extra pylon under each wing for either Magic or Sidewinder IR missiles, as well as American-made flight instruments, a British ejection seat, and the ability to fire French weapons such as Sneb rockets or Durandal bombs. This was exported to Pakistan, who had 55 of them and used them from 1983 until 2011, as well as Bangladesh and Myanmar. There was also supposed to be a version of the Q5M made for export, the A5M, with similar changes as the A5C, although the A5C was chosen instead as the program dragged on until cancellation. Whilst the Chinese Q5s never saw combat servants, the A5s have seen some. During the war in Darfur, the Sudanese Air Force used its A5s, whilst the most notable incident with the A5C was when one from Myanmar accidentally bombed a Chinese village across the border. In War Thunder, the A5C is a Rank 7 Chinese premium, available for 9,270 GE, although can be rarely seen for sale at up to half off. It's currently the only version of the Q5 to be armed with missiles, being able to carry a pair of either AIM-9P Sidewinders or Magic 1s. This increase in capability is reflected in its BR. In AirRB, it sits at 10.7, being the same BR as the J7D. In terms of other features, it plays almost identically to the Q5L in air battles, just without the targeting pod or guided bombs, but having CCIP and the good RWR. Unfortunately, even with these improvements, it still kind of feels like a mixed bag. Being able to carry missiles is nice, but almost everything at your BR has flares, and your unchanged airframe, flare count, and cannons does mean that once you've used your missiles, you're not in for a very fun time. This wasn't always the case. Before moving on to tell you how to play it, allow me to first regale you of the tale of how the A5C used to be. This thing used to be a monster, and almost single-handedly got air spawns removed from jet attackers, and got a map removed from high-tier AirRB. When it was introduced, Lizao Bay, a map now restricted to 5.0 and below, had the air spawns close enough together that an A5C, which spawned at Mark and at a decently high altitude, was able to get behind the enemy runway and shoot missiles up the tailplanes of planes still taking off. To make matters worse, it used to be 10.0, meaning most of those planes were completely flareless and would just simply die to something they didn't have the energy to evade. Fortunately for the state of the game, but unfortunately for the A5C, that is no longer the case, and it now sits at a high enough BR that it more resembles food for more capable fighters than anything else, almost as if it's being punished for its past sins. Now, on to how to play it in AirRB, and in short, you have to play quite conservatively. As you lack chaff and have a very low countermeasure count, avoid getting caught in dogfights early on in the match. Instead, flank out to the side, being careful to avoid radar missiles fired at you, and pick targets of opportunity. You're not going to outrun much at this BR aside from subsonic attackers with more flares than sense, so instead try to focus on going for distracted targets such as those engaged in dogfights or base bombing. As for which missiles to take, I'd recommend the Magics. Whilst the AIM-9Ps aren't bad and are almost as good, the extra pull of the Magics really helps. I'd still avoid for going after bases, as you'll be beaten there in almost every case. That said, if you're insistent, you'll want to bring this loadout, and give each base 2 incendiaries and 2 rockets. Overall, if you're looking for a Chinese premium, I'd recommend the J7D as it sits at the same BR but functions as a direct upgrade to the A5C. In ground RB, the A5C sits at 10.0 and, as such, doesn't have a lineup to fit into. You can up-tier it to 10.3 if you wish, but the Q5L and J7E would be better options. You lack any guided ordnance, and so if you want to operate as CAS, you're essentially playing a Q5A with a better RWR. You're able to multi-roll at least, as you have missiles, but again, something like the J7E is much better suited to the task. Once you have your Q5s, you're going to want to spade them. For the Q5 early, I'd recommend spading it in Air RB. Start with compressor and new boosters and wings repair. Grab the G-suit, engine, cover, and fuselage repair. After that, grab the offensive 23mm and new 23mm cannons before grabbing your suspended ordnance, and then finishing off with EFS. If you want to play it in ground RB, you can prioritize your bombs and rockets. For the Q5A, I'd recommend starting in Air RB to get what you need for ground RB. First, grab the flares and chaff. We're not going to be using chaff, but it leads to the Type 130s. Then, we're going to grab the Type 250. Once you're here, you can switch to ground RB. Move on by getting the HF-14s and wings repair. Then, grab the G-suit, new boosters, engine, cover, and compressor. Grab airframe and fuselage repair before finishing off with the HF-6s, offensive 23mm, new 23mm cannons, and EFS. For the Q5L, we're going to do the same and start in Air RB. Grab the compressor, the KPZS-01, and new boosters before grabbing the GB250. With those, you can make the switch to ground RB and continue with grabbing the wings repair, G-suit, engine, cover, airframe, and fuselage repair. Moving on, grab the offensive 23mm, new 23mm cannons, and EFS. Finish it off by getting the rest of the ordnance before finishing it off with flares and chaff. And for the A5C, you're a premium, so you get to laugh at all those poor Q5 players having to stock grind. And that's it for the Q5 family as it currently stands in War Thunder. While in the future we may see other Q5s, such as the Torpedo Bomber Q5 Year, we've reached the limits of what Gaijin has bestowed upon us for now. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, then liking and subscribing would mean a lot to me. My next video will be about the English Electric Lightning, but when that releases, there'll be a poll in my Discord, link in the description, for the topic of the next. And that's all from me. I've been girltwink, fly safe.